In this video, I'll be outlining why gacha games actually get way too much flack, how they've changed for the better, and how they can actually be a major gateway into gaming. But first, let's talk about why loot boxes suck ass. Loot boxes have been around for a long time and actually started in a free-to-play game in 2004. The game was MapleStory. Who here played MapleStory? Show of hands. The idea of a loot box itself isn't inherently bad, unless we obviously add some factors. I mean, in essence, a loot box is just a treasure chest that requires a key. Sometimes you can get something good, and sometimes you can get something bad. Oh, what the fuck? But where the danger comes into play is when that key is actually a card. A credit card. Now it's not just that you got something bad from a chest. It's that you spent money on that thing, which I don't really need to explain why that sucks. So from here on, when I say loot box, I mean with money. But I wanted to make it clear that the concept itself isn't inherently evil or something. But it definitely is when a game's foundational elements are locked behind them, because then a player is essentially forced to participate in the loot box system if they want to participate in the game itself. And that's already bad enough, but what makes this so much worse now is when a person already spent $60+ on the game itself, and as almost everyone knows at this point, AAA games are, more than ever, locking things behind paywalls even when you've already paid for the game itself. So let me be clear, I'm fundamentally against monetized loot boxes of any kind when they're already in-priced games, but I'm especially against them when they're in-priced games but lock important systems or components behind them. There's also the worst thing about them, which is that they are, by nature, predatory and are incredibly harmful to certain types of people. Predisposition to addiction is something that a person needs to be highly aware of when they participate in any game that contains loot boxes, because while there are games that manage to use them in better ways, as I'll address in a bit, I also accept that some people should just not participate in games that have them at all. It's like having somebody who shouldn't drink at a bar, which is also why I think that loot boxes shouldn't be anywhere near children, as kids clearly aren't mature enough to know if they could have a predisposition to addiction. Like, I didn't know I was going to be addicted to randomly asking a group of people to show their hands if they agree with me. Show of hands. Who does that? Oh, thank you. But who is that? Whose hand is that? Whose hand is that? Also, games that include loot boxes often have free currency essentially designed for people to get hooked so that they feel they have to spend money when they don't get what they want with the free currency, which I don't have to explain why that is especially bad for kids, so I'm not. Fucking get over it. So yeah, that's a laundry list of what's wrong with loot boxes. But if loot boxes have so many problems, wouldn't that also mean that gacha games, which their whole creation is centered on character-based loot boxes, are bad too? Well, I'm glad that you heard me ask your question for you, because allow me to answer me. As I said before, loot boxes are terrible in two categories. They can restrict access to important components in games, and they're inherently predatory towards children and those with proclivities towards addictive behaviors like gambling. But with gacha games, that first problem can absolutely be negated. We can even bring up games like ones I've already discussed on this channel before, Dragalia Lost and Genshin Impact. Those are two games in which every feature in the game can be completed with the free characters that the game gives you up front. Those games also have pity-based summons in which saving up enough free currency allows you to pull banner characters with a certainty instead of it always being off of random chance. Those pity numbers can be high, but new characters aren't a must to experience all that the game is offering, and for some gacha games, that can be a lot of stuff. I spoke about the fun endgame in Dragalia Lost in my review and the pretty fun story that it has as well, Both of these things can not only be experienced without pulling characters, but also without spending money at all. And I think a lot of people see free-to-play as a dirty word in gaming, mostly because of the aforementioned loot boxes, but for some people it's the only kind of games that they can play. Without the loot box mechanics, those games simply wouldn't be free. I'm not saying that this excuses predatory practices, but I am saying that when these systems are diminished by things like pity and being non-essential, it really allows for people without much money to spend on games to actually get a gaming experience, and sometimes a worthwhile one. I think a lot of us forget how expensive gaming is to people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and how non-essential they are to, I don't know, surviving. So the importance of allowing someone to actually experience a piece of art or to just relax with some dumb fun for free really can't be ignored. Again, it's gotta be done correctly, obviously, but there are games that currently do it correctly and often get shoved aside as garbage simply because they're free and have loot box mechanics. It's also obviously important to mention how gacha has changed. The wariness around loot boxes started because back in the day, like, every free-to-play gacha game locked content behind the characters that you had. Whether that be by having PvP modes which required certain characters to win, or a difficulty spike that forced a player to have better characters, gacha games of the past were bad, and almost all of their models were poorly made for the purpose of their predatory monetization schemes. But then gacha games started to change. Companies began to compete, and compete specifically for free-to-play markets. And it wasn't just competition that did this either. I'm not one of those let the market decide kind of people. I like free water, what can I say? But countries began requiring gacha game developers to display the rates for pulls, and Android and iOS began allowing more lenient returns when banners or rates were actually incorrect or misleading in a game. The market began to sway, and also be legally forced, in favor of the consumer. Also, the market obviously began to become extremely saturated, and it wasn't just who has the most whales anymore. It was also about how you can sustain the player base that you already have. And doing that requires numbers. Because of this, companies were forced to compete for the players who play for free, rather than just the players who spend the most money. This meant that content had to be accessible to everyone. Sure, you could have characters who power crept others, but if you wanted your free-to-play or low-spending crowd to stick around, you had to still make all the content in the game manageable with free characters. And events in-game also became more generous as well, with giving free characters out to everyone and giving tons of free currency out, especially during special occasions like the anniversary of the game. Unless you're Genshin Impact. But I'm sure there are still people mad about this take, and people completely dismissing every gacha game. I mean, if you're out there, show of hands. Damn it, where'd the hand go? Gacha isn't unique for their predatory game designs, and maybe that's why they also get flack for what's happened and continues to happen to the game industry as a whole. More and more genres of games are incorporating more paid elements into their games, even if the games are already fully priced. Take the current state of fighting games, for example. Some infamously lock some of people's favorite characters from past entries behind paywalls, and then proceed to add so much DLC that to buy all of it, it would cost thousands of dollars. But that's a part of my point. You don't see the same level of hatred towards fighters or the same level of hatred towards genres that have started incorporating things like battle passes. Instead, it's for the select games that do these things poorly. But for gacha games, people really throw out the baby with the bathwater while missing the forest for the trees. Wait, there he is! Who are you? Show yourself! Oh, it's a show of hands. Andy, I'm home.
Welcome home. Welcome home. How was your hand job?
Good one. Wait, you're not my wife. I gotta hand it to you. You've got a good eye. But I've also gotta hand you these fucking bullets! And I think the insane hate for gacha games isn't just because of loot boxes, but also because gacha games began without really an identity. They started as shovelware games, hell-bent on sucking the money dry from anyone they could get their grubby, often big-breasted tsundere hands on. But I think that's already starting to change. And slowly but surely, gacha has started to make a name for itself outside of the loot box mechanics that were essential in its formulation. This is also not meant as a whataboutism, though, to say, well, games all have terrible monetization systems now, which means gacha has to be good. Instead, the comparison is made to show that a game can be more than poor monetization schemes if it really has some people behind the scenes who are actual artists, or if the development team has a producer that is willing to let artists make art, instead of the almighty dollar being the only motivating factor. And I do think that's beginning to happen with some gacha games. All of this change has resulted in games like Genshin Impact, a game that clearly has a voice and personality in a landscape that has since not had much of that. I'm not going to ignore the fact that because of the nature of loot boxes, gacha games have always teetered between soulless and cynically capitalist. Content being time-gated with little keys that you need to buy to play more, and characters being obviously created with the intent just to get people to buy them first, and with artistic integrity being a second priority. Hell, if it's even a priority at all. So yes, gacha got the correct amount of flack back in the day, and I'm not trying to say that games like Genshin or Dragalia absolutely get rid of all of the problems with the genre. Genshin still has the ability to buy resin to get rid of time gates on character progression, so it's not completely gone. But how much predatory behavior and corporate cynicism is needed to make a piece of media artistically worthless? I'm not sure I even have the answer for that. All I know is that these games have progressed in a way where I very clearly can see the art in them, rather than just seeing the company trying to make a dollar. So what do you think? Do you think gacha games still get too much flack and that people don't look at them with nuance? Well, if you think like I do, might as well check out my Genshin Impact channel. For those of you wondering why this video took so long, it's because it didn't. Instead, I was essentially working on my magnum opus on the Genshin Impact channel, which outlines the entire story of the game in a timeline that's over 3 hours. So yeah, maybe I made this video so that my life's work would be taken more seriously. Who knows? But also, if you like my stuff in general, you should check out my socials. Here they are: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, my second channel, and that subscribe button if you haven't clicked it already. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, and have a fantastic day.